experts now to talk about this. Phil, that's important, that distinction that Mike Pence, we know, has gotten firsthand this presidential daily brief, and yet Donald Trump, it appears, may have not, or his team is not saying that. What do you think about that?
This word is misleading, Brianna, this word briefing. It is not a briefing, it's a conversation. You have a binder of information that talks about global events. For example, the event we had in the South China Sea where the Chinese took an American underwater drone. You would have an update on what's happening in Europe over the past day or so in Turkey and Germany. But what follows after is an opportunity for an expert in the room, that is the briefer, who spent potentially years looking at global events, answer questions from the president and his advisors. This idea that you simply present facts via an intermediary is only half the story. The real story is the ability to engage with a small room full of people, including the vice president, maybe the president-elect's national security advisor, to say, hey, briefer, what else do we need to know? I've got some follow-up questions. And then for those advisors to talk about how to act afterwards. It's really a conversation. It's not just a brief.
And you're certainly someone who knows that, as someone who was on the team that used to put together the briefing. Jackie, we know that Donald Trump is being briefed by his own national security team on the attacks. What does that tell us about the role that his team is going to be playing in the White House?
Well, right now it tells us very little, because the Trump campaign won't tell us who it is. We assume it's General Michael Flynn, who has said some very controversial things, particularly about Muslims, particularly been critical about not saying radical Islamic terror. So that if that's the person that's in his ear, we're going to see a very aggressive tone in the White House. And he really is insulating himself with his people. If he's not taking briefings or having conversations with folks outside of his immediate circle, with some of these career intelligence people who know the entire storyline, not just, whatever happened that day.
And Peter, Michael Flynn has said things, we know this publicly, that are just not true. Mm-hmm. Do you worry that if he is briefing Donald Trump, he is misrepresenting some information?
Yeah, I think it's a very big concern. I mean, the first thing is that Bill Clinton was right. Donald Trump doesn't know much. He's maybe the most ignorant man to enter in terms of policy, to enter the White House in our lifetime. He didn't know what Brexit was. He didn't know what the nuclear triad was. He didn't know who the leaders of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah. So he desperately needs people to tutor him, and he also needs to make sure that he's not captured by a bubble of people with General Flynn's kind of extreme views. I mean, to have one General Flynn in the room, fine, if they're competing views. Remember how important it was in the lead up to 9/11 that the intelligence agencies were trying to get information to the president about the danger of an Al-Qaeda attack at a time when Bush's top advisors were more focused on Iraq. If you don't have that avenue at all to pierce that bubble, especially with someone who's very ignorant like Trump, it's dangerous.
Peter, you wrote about the different responses that we saw from President Obama and Donald Trump when it came to the attacks in Ankara and Berlin. It's Donald Trump really leaned into the idea before any information was out there that this was radical Islamic terrorism. What did you think of him doing that, of jumping the gun?
Well, it's not only that he jumped the gun. I mean, first of all, he probably should have waited till we knew for sure. But the tone of his statement was markedly different than the tone of the Obama administration statement, because it just depicted it almost exclusively as a religious war. The Trump statement never talked about an attack on Germans. It framed it as an attack on Christians. This, it seems to me, is straight out of General Flynn, right, who called Islam a cancer, and a very, very dangerous way of framing these fights when we need Muslim allies, and when it plays right into ISIS's hands. It's exactly the clash of civilizations that ISIS wants.
Should his team exercise more caution, Jackie? Can they?
You'd think, but they don't seem to be willing to. They don't seem to be headed that direction. I mean, I agree with everything Peter just said. The stakes are higher when you're president. And even when you're president-elect, the stakes are higher than being a candidate. We just haven't seen that shift yet from them, because this is an administration that is going to lead from the top. We've seen that time and time again, and if Donald Trump isn't changing his tone, you can't imagine his team is going to either.
Jackie, Peter, and Phil, thank you so much for all of your insight. We do appreciate it. We have much more ahead. We are covering multiple